All right, we are live.
Hello, Bunsen Bruises YouTube and my personal Twitter, of course. You know, on an NFL Sunday, I think it's the perfect time to talk hockey. But no, in all seriousness, ladies and gentlemen, we've done this before, and we're doing it yet again here live on as of 3:20 p.m. EST in this beautiful world that we have here, early November, Veterans Day weekend. Happy Veterans Day to all of you out there, of course. And this is my guy, JB, myself, Iceman Jurg, and we're here to talk a little bit of hockey. We've gone on podcasts before to talk hockey. We've done little shows here and there when it comes to talking at the NHL because man, hockey's just a beautiful sport, and there's got to be time in the world, time in programming to be able to talk puck. And that's what we're here to do live on a Sunday. So I already introduced him once. I'll introduce him again. My guy, JB. JB, how we doing, brother?
I'm doing good. You guys are catching me super early in the morning. If you ever think about moving to Asia and you're a diehard football fan, think again. The games start. The games start at 3 a.m. The early afternoon games start at 3 a.m. and then the late afternoon games start usually around 7:15. So yeah, this is not 6:15 actually 6:15. So this is not a good place for watching NFL football. Other sports, but NFL football definitely not. So
Indeed. Shout out to my guy JB. We're crossing international date lines to do
I
this
know.
fun little episode, ladies and gentlemen. And we're here. We're two hockey fans. We love to talk hockey. And JB, early on in this season, there's plenty of hockey to talk about. And the two of us, we had actually planned. We already were planning to talk about two teams in particular here to start the program, JB. And
Yeah.
we got some news today that I think just supersedes what we would have done if we had done something else anyway. But this is perfect for what we're going to discuss on this little thing, and the people could tell by the title. Ultimately, the two main teams we're going to be talking about here: the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames. Two teams that
Yeah.
had various sets of expectations coming into the season. I think JB, along with myself. We had, in terms of the Oilers, very high expectations in terms of what this team could do. Back-to-back years where they won at least one playoff round, conference finals 2 years ago, second round series against the who ended up being the Stanley Cup champions last year. Pretty competitive second round for the most part. The longest series that Vegas dealt with was against the Edmonton Oilers. So there's that for there's a moral victory there for intensive purposes. And then you had the Calgary Flames on the other side that I don't know about you, Jimmy. We'll get into this once we get to talk about them. I didn't personally have the highest of expectations coming into the season when it comes to the Flames, but
Yeah.
I knew podcasts like like you, we
Yeah.
listen to podcasts. I've heard a couple of various people say that they like there still was pieces and potential there for Calgary to maybe have a bounce back campaign.
I think that a lot of people, when they were looking at Calgary, I think that a lot of people had them as like maybe a wild card or maybe sneaking in a top three finish if the Kings were to fall off because that division's pretty weak and actually a lot of people were kind of down on Seattle this year because they had kind of a rough offseason. They lost quite a few people, so yeah.
Yeah, so two, for all intents and purposes, playoff caliber teams. Of course, one more so than the other, and two teams
Mm,
in the province of Alberta, I believe is the proper term. I nearly said state there, being the American I am, but no, province, ladies and gentlemen. We get the proper terminology out there for our international friends
mm,
here. But two teams that had the expectations, JB, and well, to say the least, both are very much struggling at a very equivalent level. If it wasn't for the San Jose Sharks this season that are trying to be historically bad at a historically bad pace, I think these would be the two definitive worst teams, bar none, at
mm,
this point in the season so far. So let's talk about the more recent bit of news that broke here when it comes to the Edmonton Oilers. We probably were going to start the proceedings off with them anyways, but the Oilers have wasted no time in what they think is going to solve things. So as I said, a team coming into the season, Stanley Cup expectations, 14 games into the season. As of we are doing this live, 3-9-1 to begin the campaign. Not ideal whatsoever. Rough defense. Maybe still a little bit of injury there in terms of one guy, Matthias Ekholm. Just poor goaltending, to say the very least. Jack Campbell being sent down to the minors at the cap hit he has just lets you know that hasn't worked out for them. Stuart Skinner himself struggling, although he did just have a good game here recently. I think last night he only allowed one goal, and the Oilers were able to do their job. But even despite a win last night, again, as we're recording this, and better is a very tough term to say in terms of how their season started, but a victory could not secure the man's job. Jay Woodcroft was fired this morning, early afternoon. I know it's a very different time for you as well. It'd be probably the dead of night, maybe, is when this news hit on your
Oh
time,
yeah,
JB.
yeah,
But
yeah. It so it's actually Monday morning at 5:25 a.m. It actually broke. It broke. For me, like Monday morning, like 1 a.m. I would say probably about 1 a.m. It broke for me. So yeah.
man, early times to say the very least. But Jay Woodcroft, no longer the head coach of the Edmonton Oilers. He has been fired and he has been replaced immediately by Chris Nolbach, excuse me, or is it no?
Mhm.
We'll figure it out. But Nolbach is going to be the new head coach for the Edmonton Oilers. The 45-year-old, the last 4 seasons being on the Hartford Wolfpack as coach, and then before that he was also with the Erie Otters. That ties into things as we'll get into a little bit detail here momentarily when we talk about him being the replacement for Jay Woodcroft. Let's talk about the Jay Woodcroft firing here, JB. And we were having a little bit of discourse about it just before we got live here. I think we both agree that, on the list of problems of the Edmonton Oilers to start the season, Jay Woodcroft, I don't think either of us would have put in the top three. But in a situation like this,
Mhm.
and we've seen this so many times, especially in this league, JB, the first person to get the
Yeah.
axe that for what GMs and EVPs are going to think is going to fix things tends to be the head coach. So your thoughts overall on the decision of the Oilers to think we got to do something, and it's firing their head
Um,
coach?
I I feel legitimately bad for Woodcraft, and I'll say this. I think, like you just mentioned, I think on the list of things that's wrong with the Oilers, he's way down the list. I think that when you just look at the Oilers, what you have seen from the Oilers the last 6, 7 years, it's just very, very bad front office is what I think of. And people don't want to say it because of who their general manager is, because he has ties to, Detroit. Ken Holland has been a lousy GM for the last decade or longer than the last decade. He's been a very, very bad decade. When you look at the roster construction of this team, it's not very good. It's team building malpractice when you go into a season like they did a few years ago with a goaltender who's on the decline at 40 years old. What was the guy's name? And he,
I think Mike
uh,
Smith and Miko Kokkonen at one
Mike
point was
Smith.
the
Yeah, Mike.
goaltending
Yeah,
duo.
Mike Smith. And there's even the story about Miko Koskinen. He's a free agent, and his team basically came up with a number, and I think the number was 3 years, and the full length of the contract was going to be, I think, 1.5 or 1.7 million, and they overpay him, and his agent is legitimately surprised at negotiation. The agent, he just stays quiet. He's like, damn, they overpaid us. They're just a joke for front office. The goaltending is horrible. Like, here's the thing: at the end of the day, there are two things I know about sports. If you're a football team, if you don't have a quarterback, you're not going to win games. And as a hockey team, if you don't have a good goaltender, you're not going to win games. Stuart Skinner, and look, and I'm not saying anything bad about Stuart Skinner. Stuart Skinner could turn into a good goalie. But for you to go into the season last year, he was supposed to be your backup, but Jack Campbell's been a bust. Jack Campbell has been a very, very, very bad goaltender uh, the last two regular seasons so far since they signed him to that 5 year, $25 million contract. You know, um, I'm looking at the stats now. So far this year, in the 13 games that they played, they've scored 35 goals, which is a problem. Like, you expect for them to score more goals than that, but they've given up 52 goals. Like, their goaltending is atrocious. If they were getting decent goaltending, and here's the thing: you don't have to have a great goaltender. Your goaltender just has to be a grown up and not letting stuff. Let's say they were getting Antti Niemi, 2010 goaltending from the Blackhawks. They'd be in good shape. But they're not even getting that. They're not even getting league average. They're getting they're getting horrible goaltending, and that's not going to change the goaltending. If the goaltending doesn't get any better, the situation's not going to get any better. That's yeah. Ken Holland has been a very, very bad GM, and people don't want to say anything because of his history and what he did with the Red Wings. And look, he did a great job with the Red Wings. He built some really good teams there, but you know, how much longer does he get a pass for?
The answer should be none. And the answer, to guys like you and I, JB, is we have a short leash when it comes to him. People forget that Ken Holland himself, like he was the one that put the Red Wings in the place that they've been at the last couple of years, which was just a struggling team. They continued to just make random moves to try to keep the playoff streak alive back when they had it, and then when it eventually ended, they were just in such a poor, bad spot that it's taken Steve Yzerman and his GM tenure so far. It took him a couple of years, and people were making jokes about the Yzer plan and all that. And people are like, well, when is it finally going to bear fruit? I think we need to give and the Red Wings have been good so far this season. Maybe we'll talk about them after we talk about the Alberta teams. But it's taken a couple of years for Yzerman to take what was the remnants of such a terrible tenure at the end with Holland to finally fix all this stuff up. Like it's taken a while. Man. It's taken a while, and that's what bad decisions can do to an organization.
And you look at the prior GM, Chiarelli. I mean, he didn't do a good job, but I mean, what Chiarelli did to the Oilers pales in comparison with Ken Holland. It's been just team building. Like a masterclass should be taught for people who are aspiring to be front office people, GMs, and there should be a masterclass taught of what Ken Holland has done to the Red Wings, what he's done to the Red Wings and what he's done to the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, it's just very, very, very poor management skills and team building. It's a shame. You have two of the best players in the league, two guys who are always going to be MVP candidates, and the team has missed the playoffs a few times. That's unacceptable. The team is getting swept out the playoffs. I mean, and look, we can talk about this. We can just have an honest conversation. The playoffs in hockey are random, but for you to get swept in that series a few years ago against Winnipeg, I mean, that stuff shouldn't be happening, and it ends up always being the coach's fault. Like, I'm not a big fan of the prior coach. His name, I'm losing. It's not coming.
Tippett. Tippett was the coach before Woodcroft.
Yeah, because I'm a Dallas Stars fan, and I think that if he has the pieces there, I think that system works very well. But if it's not there, the team can end up being just a dumpster fire. But Jay Woodcroft came in a few years ago when they looked like they were going to miss the playoffs, and he got them to the conference finals. And last year, had the team had better goaltending, they end up beating Vegas last year. But he's not the issue. The issue is the fact their goaltending is so poor, and their defense is not very good either.
Yeah, and what you mentioned the mismanagement that's happened, and that goes in between the two general managers that McDavid's had for about the entirety of his career. With Peter Chiarelli first, he signed Milan Lucic to that deal in Edmonton as a guy to quote unquote protect McDavid, which I think hindsight 2020 probably didn't need, especially with the way the league was going. And then he was the one, you mentioned the Mikko Koskinen deal before. That was actually that was his deal that he signed that Ken Holland then inherits. Ken Holland then is like, who's going to solve everything here? Mike Smith and goaltending, and then eventually throws the money at Jack Campbell, who you mentioned his struggles this regular season so far. Only started in 5 games, really probably should have been less than that, but an .873 save percentage and a 4.5 goals against average last season in, let me get the full number here, 34 starts. He got plenty of wins, but that's definitely because of the goal scoring of Edmonton, because his stats were a 3.41 goals against average with an .888 save percentage. I wonder how many more decimal points we go until we get a number that aside from 8 in that. But ultimately, it has been mismanagement by the Edmonton Oilers that has led to yet another coach getting fired. And ironically, like we mentioned Jay Woodcroft, this was a situation years ago, JB, you mentioned that during the season where they ended up going to the conference finals, Jay Woodcroft was hired within that season. Same thing this team always does is fire the head coach, bring the new guy in. Things look good a little bit. They give him one full season for sure. Things might be fine. And underperformance happens somewhere along the way. Next season, it's rough. Boom, fire. This is going to be the second coach in a row, maybe even the third if we go farther back. But I'm confident saying at least the second coach in a row where this is going on with the Oilers, because that was the case with Tippett. Like you said, I think he took over mid to late point in the season, gets to the playoffs in a full season, gets swept like you mentioned years ago in that Winnipeg series, is struggling the year after, fired. Boom, playoffs, underperforming. Now, boom, Jay's fired, and we have a new coach coming in as well. The result for that, we'll see. But just it sucks. I'm with you, man. I feel badly for Jay Woodcroft. I think the only thing is that with the defensive side, To me, it's a little bit of both, to where the head coach is responsible for setting up the defense. And I can see an argument for people saying that the defense could be better in terms of
Yeah,
certain performances, excluding the goaltender for a second, because the
yeah.
goaltending has just been bad. But I could see the argument for there, but I would also argue is that his guys aren't fully all the way there. Darnell Nurse and Evan Bouchard, two guys who, I mean, Bouchard's fantastic offensively, not that much of a defensive blue liner, right? And,
And
you
Dar-
know,
and Dar-
Matthias
and Dar-
Ekholm,
yeah, and Darnell Nurse has that contract keeps looking bad. He's not been a
yeah.
good defenseman. He's not been a good defenseman for a while. I mean, it's just at some point or another, and I think this would be a really interesting to talk to sports owners about this. At what point do you start looking at the front office and start saying, like, hey, you guys can't keep on firing coaches? Like, I've always been under the belief that if you are a general manager, if you get to where you're going to fire and you're about to hire your third coach, I think that's when the owner has to step in and say, no, you hired this guy. You need to do something to make this work, because it's just it's a joke. You keep on hiring people, and then you fire the people, and you get away with it. It's like you're not being held accountable for the decisions that you're making. You created this mess. You thought going into the season with Mike Smith was a good idea. When Mike Smith ended up having the career-ending injury, and I don't think he's officially retired yet, but you shouldn't be going into the season with a goaltender that's 39, 40 years old. I mean, that's just not smart right there. It's not. Every goaltender, if we know anything about NHL history, goaltenders usually start falling off by the time they're 35 or 36 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and Ken Holland's been around the NHL for a very, 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 very long time, longer than me and you have been alive.
Very true. Yeah.
And he thought it was a good idea to go into the season with Mike Smith as goaltender. And then here's the other thing too. You signed Jack Campbell to that. You look at some of these other teams who were able to get other goaltenders, like the Colorado Avalanche were able to get Darcy Kemper. They could have signed Darcy Kemper. Darcy Kemper would be better than that. I'm not saying Darcy Kemper is the best thing since sliced bread, but Darcy Kemper is adult. If they had Darcy Kemper as their starting goalie, they'd be in a better position
Right.
than they are now. You look at Aiden Hill. Aiden Hill, the Coyotes got rid of Aiden Hill for nothing. There were other options. Even a James Reimer would be better than what they have right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know?
Campbell has, like, as you mentioned, fully underperformed since arriving into Edmonton, and Stuart Skinner has been, he's had decent stretches of time, but we even saw in the playoffs last season he struggled in the playoffs. The Oilers nearly lost to the Kings because of Stuart Skinner.
Because Skinner and Stuart Skinner is a backup at the moment. If they don't solve the goaltending issue, they're not going anywhere.
Right, and we'll see. There have already been plenty of rumors. I don't think anything for us to really talk about in that, but there are rumors that the Oilers are trying to look for a fix at goaltending at this point of the season, which honestly not a bad idea, all things considered. If you want to try to fix a problem as early on, that it probably is the best thing, and they do it with the head coach. So let's briefly talk about the guy who has been hired to be the new head coach of this team. As I mentioned, Chris Nalbach lands in Edmonton, and I'm reading this tweet via Frank Cervalli on Twitter. This was sent out hours ago. He gets hired in Edmonton. Many believe it's because of Connor McDavid, because the two actually do have a connection. As I mentioned, Nalbach going back to the Erie Otters days, Connor McDavid was on that team. But what is clear is that the Oilers CEO, Jeff Jackson, is also a big believer in him. As an agent, many of Jackson's clients played for the Oilers' new head coach now, which includes Connor McDavid, Connor Brown, Alex DeBrincat, Taylor and Darren Radish, Travis Dermott, and Ben Harper. So clearly, even aside from a superstar a connection with the superstar, which, maybe making sure Connor McDavid is happy. I mean, that should always be the goal, but maybe that was a big thing. Is also a guy that the CEO is familiar with, which, JB, death taxes and hockey guys are just going to hire the people they know ultimately to be a head coach. I mean, I will give credit. At least this is a guy who hasn't been a head coach before in this league. So yeah. I give slight credit, but it's also like, should he be a head coach? Was he ready? Was he one of those guys next in line to be a head coach? That I can't say for sure. I'm not an expert when it comes to the NHL coaching trees, to say the very least, ladies and gentlemen. But, it's certainly always interesting to hear, like, there's ties to this organization. It feels like every single thing has a tie to it. So he's coming in is Nalbach, and clear expectation turn this season around
Mhm.
for Edmonton and find a way to get into the playoffs. Like you mentioned, the Pacific Division, we talked about before, going into the season, not a lot of people thought the Pacific was too stacked up. It was really the two main teams going into the preseason, which was Vegas and Edmonton. And then obviously Edmonton's fallen off. Another team has actually stepped up in tow to be the second team. Again, we might talk about them a little bit later on this episode, but that is clearly the expectation for them. Only 7 points in the standings right now. JB, just point blank, what is the ultimate thing that the Oilers' new head coach needs to work this team on and find some magic with if they're going to get wins?
I mean, they look like they were just a team that was lacking confidence. I think he just needs to maybe instill some confidence in them. They looked pretty good last night in Seattle. I mean, but it's Seattle. Seattle to me is going to be a team that maybe they're going to be fighting maybe for a wild card, and looks like maybe they won't get it. But I just think he needs to instill some confidence in them, and maybe just new coach, a new voice will breathe some new light to them. But like the thing is with Woodcroft hadn't even been there for 2 years. I mean, did you already grow tired of hearing his voice under 2 years? I mean, like I just think that this is just I think this is the Oilers front office throwing something at a dartboard, hoping it sticks. And this screams of desperation, actually. And I understand that you have the stats about in the NHL that if you aren't within so many points by Thanksgiving, um, that you're pretty much done. Like if you aren't within a playoff spot by Thanksgiving, like I think 80% of the time you don't make the playoffs. So this screams of desperation.
Yeah, and man, how many times have we seen this throughout the history of the league where coach gets fired and magic does or does not happen? I think this is a very romanticized idea because we've seen it so many times. I think you think of the Pittsburgh Penguins, who they fired head coaches before in order to win Stanley Cups in the Sidney Crosby era. You think of the
Mhm.
St. Louis Blues just a couple of years ago; they made the
Yeah.
the firing and then hiring of it was Craig Berube, who ends up taking them all the way to the Stanley Cup, and that team was down low by the new year even. So
Oh,
it's
they were last in the league. Like I
yep.
think on January 1st they were last in the league, and they caught fire. And I mean, but Jordan Bennington played out of his mind. And Jordan Bennington hasn't been very good since that happened. But Jordan Bennington, I mean, like hell, man, Jordan Bennington there would be amazing, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps and other names as well, and we'll see if within the next week or so, Edmonton looks to try to make a move in net to just better that team. I think it's obvious that they have to. What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? I think they're probably going to be trying to unload this Campbell contract in concurrent move, either in that trade or maybe another trade. It's going to be messy times to say the very least. So we'll see if Ken Holland can find a way to get out of this because you mentioned mismanagement. Man, if they miss the playoffs this year, I think Ken Holland is gone, and we'll see what happens there. Let's go to the other team in Alberta here now, JB, that, struggling as well. But their GM probably isn't going to be sacked this season because, well, this is the first time GM in Craig Conroy with the Calgary Flames and a new head coach that just got hired this past offseason as well. So relatively new stability. Well, not stability, I should say, new faces in power when it comes to that team. Of course, Daryl Sutter was let go in the offseason, particularly enough after Brad Sherliving had already agreed to no longer be general manager of this franchise anymore. So that was quite the weird offseason, to say the very least. The Flames, it was weird because a lot of people thought they were going to break it apart in this past summer. They didn't think they were going to keep the Gort together. But as things progressed, they kept a lot of the team. We've already seen certain reports on certain guys and what their long-term futures are. We know Noah Hannafin already is planning on leaving Calgary, so he's a for sure trade deadline candidate. It's been going back and forth on Elias Lindholm on if he's going to be in Calgary long-term versus if he's going to get dealt. Not sure what the future is there, but the Calgary Flames, to say the very least, JB, a team that is going to get our new arena here in the next couple of seasons over in Calgary. It's not been easy times. And, this ultimately stems from the fact that, just a little over a year ago, way more than just a year ago at this point, but like 15, 16 months, I think is around the time. This team loses Johnny Gaudreau in free agency, ownership lowballing him the entire time before trying to make one last ditch offer that just fell upon deaf ears. Rightfully so, because, don't mess with your superstars and maybe actually try to pay them early. And then Matthew Tkachuk ultimately made the decision of like, yeah, I actually don't really want to be here for the long term. So Calgary actually gave him his contract extension and then shipped him off to the Florida Panthers in that trade. And, you think you got something relatively decent back, and they got a in theory, a decent haul for a Matthew Tkachuk. On paper, at that point, Huberdeau, who was second in the league in scoring that season that had just finished up, and then a Mackenzie Weegar, who was a bona fide top 4 defenseman in this league, right? That's pretty good for sending a winger out, but you fast forward these 16 months later, man, this team looks to be in shambles. Guys want to leave. The organization doesn't look like it really for sure knows what it wants to do with a couple of these pieces. And the guy that you sent away to Florida, well, he just made a Stanley Cup final here in this past season. So tough times in Calgary to say the very least. So JB, my question to you, because I think, again, for me, I didn't have the high expectations. You kind of mentioned how there was the thought that they could be. I put you in the general manager chair in Calgary, right? What would you do with this team? If you had to make the decision today, what is the future of the Calgary Flames looking like for the rest of the season going into next year? What do you think it should be the decision that they make up there?
I think that if you're the general manager and you're the front office, you have to just go to the owner and you have to tell the owner, look, last year the players complained about the coach. They said that we didn't play good because the coach was an asshole. And don't get me wrong, Daryl Sutter is an asshole. I mean, he won when he was with the Kings, but there's a reason why he's been in so many teams during the course of his career. He's a hard guy to play for. But you have Ryan Huska now. I mean, Ryan Huska is a nice guy, and you're still not playing. I think that ownership has to go to the owner, and they have to say, we have to break this up, and they need to just tell the owner, look, we're gonna break this up. This is not gonna look pretty, actually, and we're gonna be bad, actually, and we're not just gonna probably be bad this year, but we're probably gonna be bad the next 2 years, actually. But they need to break this team up because something is rotten with this team, man. I just think that there's a lot going on within that locker room that we're not hearing about because they don't look like a team that particularly likes each other when they play hockey. And it's really crazy too, because this is pretty much the same team that made the second round a few years ago. And it was just the fact that Markstrom he looked horrible in that second round series, and Markstrom's really hasn't been the problem. I think that you just have to maybe unload some of these contracts, and the Nazem Kadri signing has not paid any fucking dividends whatsoever. Excuse my language, but it really hasn't. And you have a team that's high up there in the salary cap. They're paying some people on this team. Markstrom's making a pretty penny. Kadri's making a pretty penny. Huberdeau is on the team, right? He's making a pretty penny, and Huberdeau looks like a shell of himself too. I just think that this team needs like a cleanse. It needs a cleanse, or what's the name of that movie? It needs a cleanse, or if you're into horror movies, it needs a purge. That's what this team needs.
A purge indeed. A purge indeed. So this is going to be interesting to say the very least when it comes to Calgary. So the Calgary Flames are in a really rough spot for several reasons. Even if we look past the team that's currently being iced at the moment, it's the fact that their draft capital, their 2024 pick is up in the air at the moment because it was involved in a trade many moons ago, getting future considerations because they had dumped Sean Monahan's contract a while back towards the Montreal Canadiens. And now there's a couple of different protections on that, some scenarios. It's a conditional pick. The pick could end up becoming a 2025 pick ultimately, but right now it's in contention. I think 2024 pick is still a possibility that the Flames could end up losing that to Montreal as well. So we'll see what happens. I honestly think, man, and this goes back to my thoughts in the offseason, I think it's wholesale. So not wholesale purge, but trading the assets that you can and then bringing back in what makes sense for this team. Because when you have a team like this, when you have a Nazem Kadri, who, like you mentioned, is locked in for 5 more years after this one at a $7 million cap hit, when you have a Jonathan Huberdeau who's locked in for 7 more years with a $10.5 million cap hit after this one, I don't think any team in the league is taking either of those two. Kadri, you could maybe have a chance on, but you're going to have to retain salary for that, for sure. And I think, we mentioned, you were talking about Flames ownership. Flames ownership has clearly shown they don't want to retain salary in any of these deals if they don't have to, and they just don't want to. So I think what my thoughts are for Calgary is that you're going to have to do a very weird in-between at the moment where you'll have to sell off the pieces that I think is very clear aren't going to be there for the long term, which is Elias Lindholm. Like I mentioned, I think the ship has set sail. I think he's likely going to get dealt at this trade deadline. It would have been better if they had found a way in the offseason, but they were so wishy-washy on, he's going to stay, he's going to be the guy, et cetera, this, that, and the third. And then where's the contract? Nothing ever happened. It seems like yet again, they don't want to pay a guy here that is, he's fallen off in terms of like, he's not a 40 goal scorer. Like that was just a one season aberration, but he's still very much a 20, 25 goal, 60 to 70 point, good two-way player that could be at worst your second line center. I think a lot of teams would love a player like that. A lot of teams would pay a pretty penny for that kind of player. So you have a guy like that.
Nikita Zadorov, he requested a trade. I mean, I think you could move. Yep. I just think that at some point or another, like if you want to clean this mess up, you're going to have to retain some of the salary, because I don't think having a Jonathan Huberdeau in the locker room where he just looks miserable, I don't think having a guy in your locker room like that, I don't think that that's good, especially if you bring in a bunch of like young kids to replace this. I don't think having a guy that's miserable there who's not playing well, I don't think that's the best thing for team morale, actually. Now, and look, I don't know what's going on in the locker room, but something's not right with the team. And this has been going on for a while. Something's been wrong with this team ever since the Bill Peters situation.
Yeah.
Ever since Bill Peters got, and you remember the year before they won the West, and Nathan McKinnon just kicked their ass in that series, because I've never seen. I've seen a 8 seed just dismantle a number 1 seed, but like literally, they won the first game of the series and they hung on by the skin of their teeth. What Colorado did to them was horrible. Like Colorado just blew them out the playoffs and made them look like they were the worst number 1 seed of all time. And they weren't a very good number 1 seed. They just won. They had the most points in the West, because I think the West was a bit of a down year that year, because I believe they were number 1 that year and the Nashville Predators were number 2, and both of those teams got knocked out in the first round that year. But ever since the 2019 playoffs, this team has just not looked good. I mean, I know they made the second round a few years ago, but I mean, they barely beat the Dallas Stars when Rick Bowness was their coach. They had a hard time with them.
Yep.
They couldn't score, and the team just looks. The team, it doesn't look like a very good team, and it doesn't look like a team that really strikes fear in you at all either. So.
Yeah, they haven't been that way for a while, and I like it's funny. You could really hit it at 2 different points where this team and this core kind of lost its luster. The playoffs that you're referring to is that they were the number 1 team in the Pacific, number 1 team in the West, 107-point regular season, losing in 5 games to the Colorado Avalanche in the 2019 playoffs, and then you go back even not this past season, but the year before, 2022, very similar situation. Number 1 team in the Pacific Division, 111 points. I want to say they were number 2 in the West for the 21-22 season. You win a first-round series against Dallas, like you said, that series had to go to 7, and if it wasn't for Jacob Markstrom, they don't win that series, because we saw the early signs of just how good he is. For your Dallas Stars, that series goes to 7. And then Edmonton, the weird high-scoring first game in that series, right, where the Flames at one point, I think they were up 5-1, and then 6-2, and then the Oilers still tied it, but the Flames were just able to win that. And then the rest of the series, the Oilers absolutely shellacked them for the rest.
Yeah, Mike Smith got a shot on that. I mean, come on, man. Like, look, man. And come on, I like Mike Smith, man. He played for my Dallas Stars when I was in high school, and he had some really good years. I mean, they should build a statue of him outside of Arizona, actually, right, because he's the main reason why they made the conference final. I mean, not that any of the fans would know who he is if they build a statue of him. How many people go to Arizona Coyote games? Like 1,000 at most?
Well, I like to think they are close to packing. It's a pretty small arena regardless. But no, man, I think when it comes to the Calgary Flames, you're in this weird spot, like you said. But this is where we need to think of the above and think of ownership. And I think it's just been very obvious that ownership just doesn't really I don't think they're going to retain salary. I think you're in a weird spot here where you're forced to maintain some of the pieces on this team for longer than most situations would, allow you, and then you're just gonna have to solve the rest. You mentioned Nikita Zadorov, who's basically requested a trade. He's kind of looked done since like game 2 or 3 with this team, because it has not been a good spot.
I mean, he hasn't looked like himself either. I mean, he hasn't. I mean, I know a lot of people like him. He's big and physical, but man, I've seen him get cooked in the playoffs. I remember in the bubble when he played for the Avalanche, right, and when Dallas was struggling to score points, Dallas was making him look bad under Rick Bowness. Man, that should never happen. If Rick Bowness is your coach and you're going against Rick Bonus in a 7-game series. If he's making one of your defenders looks bad, as bad of an offensive coach as Rick Bonus is, I mean, I think that you have to say, man, there's no way in the world that if we have championship aspirations, can this guy be a top 4 defenseman for us? He needs to be he needs to be your 6th or your 7th defenseman at best,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Zadorov is going to be finding his way out. Noah Hannafin, like I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, he has a modified no trade clause, so he's going to likely be finding his way out towards closer towards the trade deadline. Maybe Christopher Tanev, all things considered. You know, I don't know what the situation is here. I don't think I've ever heard Christopher Tanev speak in his career, but in all seriousness, he might be off the team at the deadline. And again, you just look at the forwards. Is Mangiapane a guy who 1 year left after the season? Is he going to be there for the long term? Again, Elias Lindholm, I think, is the number one name to look out for. It's where you have people to trade and then you would get back spots, but then it's also a case where you got to trade one of your goalies because Dustin Wolf is coming up to the main roster now. And Dustin Wolf, JB, for the last 2-3 years is said by some people to be the best goaltender not playing in the NHL at the moment. So you're going to have to make way for him. And that means either Markstrom or Vladar is going to have to be dealt. Jacob Markstrom, you would think in theory, because, you know, his dip in performance last season would be cause for that. But, you know, this is also Calgary where you kind of fall into a situation where like the Winnipeg Jets are in, man, where it's tough to keep guys in your team. And if Jacob Markstrom says that he wants to stay as a Calgary Flame, do you really trade him or do you trade a Dan Vladar who is on a cheaper contract? And I think several teams would like him very much to kind of be a stopgap if there's an injury concern or even a very good backup. So a lot of decisions to make if you're Calgary. And I think the reason why I say that this is a 50-50 thing is because you got to find a way to get Kadri and Huberdeau going. And if that's internally or in one of these trades that you need to make with sending someone away and you get a player back, you got to find a way because ultimately, and I'm not saying that you do this because you're going to build to get to a higher, like, I'm not saying that you're doing this to become something special. What I'm saying is that you mentioned confidence and, energy. You got to get those two guys' confidence and energy back first. And I think the only way to do that is to get them playing well. And they need to be able to play on a team with line mates where things work. I think Kadri centering the second line is fine. The guys around him just need to be able to do their job skill-wise. And I think Jonathan Huberdeau, I think when we saw him be the second leading scorer in this league a couple seasons ago, only bested by Connor McJesus himself, funny enough, like he is best on a line where he can help set his guys up. So you need to get guys that can, he's the one that can bring the puck up. He can, set guys up. He's not a natural finisher, right? Like he could put on goals. He could put on 25 goals, but he's not a beast. Like he's not a goal scorer where it's like of his 100 points, 40 of them are goals. No. When he was the second leading scorer, I think he only had 35 goals at most.
Yeah. I think he's about a 25 to 30 plus goal scorer, and if he's having a 100-point year, he's going to end up with 60, 70 assists actually. So, I mean, and that's good right there. I mean, he's very good. Handling the puck or whatever. He's actually very, like, when you're watching him, like it's like poetry in motion actually if you're a hockey fan, like when he was really at his heyday with Florida. It's unfortunate just that Florida just kind of soured on that team a bit because they just kept on getting run off the ice in the playoffs by the juggernaut of the Tampa Bay Lightning. But I mean, Huberdeau can play, but he's lost it in Calgary, and I don't know. Maybe trade Markstrom to the Edmonton Oilers. I'm sure the Oilers they're so desperate for goaltending. You maybe could sell them. You could sell them the Brooklyn Bridge as well.
maybe, man. So it's quite the situation to say the very least, and what we are going to be seeing happen with these two teams. The Edmonton Oilers, of course, still with their playoff aspirations, probably going to be making a trade here, maybe a little bit later than what we're expecting, but making a move here, or at least getting on some sort of hot streak, very much needed at this point with how far down in the standings they are. And of course, the Calgary Flames, I think it's a tear down city ultimately for when it comes to them. But hey, Calgary, got that new arena coming in a couple of years, so I guess there's that. So let's move on from that. Those were the two main teams that we wanted to talk about here, ladies and gentlemen. So the crux of it is done, but there's still a little bit that we can talk about when it comes to going around the NHL. We very much stayed in the Western Conference for the most part here. Let's finish off discussing anything in the West that we want to talk about real quick here, JB. The Vancouver Canucks, eh?
Yeah. Rick Tocchet, and he's got them playing very good. I mean, they look legitimate. I would be very surprised if they don't make the playoffs. Like I think something disastrous would have to happen to them because what I think is funny is that a lot of the talk in the Western Conference was how bad the Central was going to be this year. I think that when people were talking about the Central, you were talking about the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche as being the two best teams and the teams that probably would be able to challenge the Vegas Golden Knights. And you were struggling to find a third team. It looks like there's been a flip, like because like the Pacific looks doesn't look good. I mean, you have Golden Knights, you have the Canucks, and then you have the Kings.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of people are saying, "Oh, well, the Central is only going to get three playoff teams." I mean, the Pacific might only get three playoff teams. I mean, like
Right.
with how they're playing. I mean, like, but yeah, no, the Canucks look good. I think the other thing I'm going to say about the Central too, I thought something that I thought a lot of people were not paying attention to the Blues. I told people I thought the Blues and I thought that the Predators would be better than people expected. I know a lot of people expected for the Wild to secure that third spot, in the Central. I just didn't like how the Wild ended their season last year.
Right.
Uh, yeah, I think so far we can say that in the West you have the four main teams so far have been the Avalanche, who are struggling a bit because their goaltending has not been good.
Right.
But you have Avalanche, you have Dallas out the Central, and then in the Pacific you have the Golden Knights and you have the Canucks. Those have been the four best teams in the West so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
Vancouver really taking in that spot second in the West right now in terms of points, only behind the Vegas Golden Knights at the moment. They've just been stud. Thatcher Demko looking like a man possessed. I think a very early candidate for the Vezina Trophy at this moment of how good he's performing. And Elias
He's
Pettersson played well, JT Miller. And man, early Norris Trophy candidate, Quinn Hughes, a guy who, think about it, man, a couple years ago in the bubble playoffs, right, where we got some of the great performances. Cale Makar and the Colorado Avalanche did well getting to the second round that year. Your Dallas Stars, you have Miro Heiskanen, who had an extremely brilliant playoff run, really, in going to the Stanley Cup final in that bubble. But don't forget the Vancouver Canucks in that playoff. That bubble performance led people, myself included, the following year to have expectations for this team, which probably fell flat. And the last couple of years, It's almost been like, when are you going to, if you're Vancouver, you have Elias Pettersson, who's a stud. You have Quinn Hughes, who offensive genius, had to pick things up on the other end, although he's played great this season on both ends. Quinn Hughes, this is the most complete he's looked so far in his young career. Still very young, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a guy who's even touched his prime yet, and he's playing this well in terms of being the top points producing defenseman in the league at this point, if I'm not mistaken. Like this is the Vancouver team that people have been waiting for since that bubble run, JB, and it looks like they're finally showing off what was there. It's just taken a lot of time, a lot of heartache to get to that point, and like you said, it's very dangerous. We have a definitive top four in the West right now. For those of you, if this is maybe you're new to hockey and you're listening to us for the first time, well, first off, if you're listening to us as your first ever hockey podcast, welcome. But more so, the way it works in hockey is that with the divisions in the East and the West, the top three teams in each division make it locked in, and then there's two wild card teams that could be either side of the conference, like JB was mentioning. Both could be from one of the divisions, or it could be a 1-1 split, all things considered. I think there is we know who the top four are. There is a very truncated middle with so many various teams right there, and I think we need to let a little bit more time pass before we can start to talk about who is the best in that middle portion.
And I'm gonna say this too. I think a team that I didn't mention that I thought I saw a lot of people say a sleeper playoff team. The Coyotes are not bad this year. The Coyotes are actually a pretty decent team. If you take them lightly this year, take them lightly at your own discretion. The Coyotes are not bad, and I thought the Coyotes would maybe be trading a lot of the people that they signed in the offseason. I'm not sure, man, if the Coyotes are in playoff position when it comes down to the trade deadline. I don't think that you trade. I don't think you have a fire sale. I think that you keep some of these guys actually. Yeah, so the Coyotes have actually been impressive. They've lost a couple of games I thought that they should have won, but they're not like the Nikolai Habibulin Coyotes.
Wow, that's a deep pull there,
Yeah,
JB. That
of
is
the
a massively deep pull.
of the late '90s, but they're decent. They're a decent team.
I know
They're
you're
not a
right.
disaster.
You're right. You're right. I definitely get you,
Yeah,
man. I think the Coyotes are going to be a dark horse team again. It's why I mentioned that we need to wait because the Coyotes, they can very much find a way where the St. Louis Blues they've had solid play so far. It's been nothing
yeah,
spectacular, even, and they've just been like even keeled, right? You have the Seattle Kraken who made the postseason last year, who have not performed at that same level so far this season in the Pacific side. You have the Winnipeg Jets who kind of similar to the Blues, just kind of they're there. They're a good team.
yeah,
There's talent there. Rick Bowness, your former head coach, is the guy there. We'll see what happens. It's a very logjam middle, which I definitely can't wait. The two of us will definitely revisit this in probably like another month and a half or so, see where the
yeah,
West shakes up. But it's the top four. Who's going to join them? Wait and see situation ultimately there. So that is the
yeah.
Western Conference side of things in the NHL. Let's go to the Eastern Conference side of things and talk about just notable things that are happening. I mentioned them towards the beginning. They've slightly tapered off since their hot start, but they're still pretty good. Tied for third in the division at the moment in the Atlantic. The Detroit Red Wings, JB, have looked relatively good in short order. Again, a little bit cool off since the hot start for them. But the Detroit Red Wings, after years, like we've mentioned, of tough seasons for this team and a little bit of building to do, they're playing a lot better. Alex DeBrincat, 10 goals in 15 games. Turns out he still can score goals, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Dylan Larkin, 17 points. He's roundabout to form well. Lucas Raymond, a solid start to the season. Maurice Seider being a top defenseman on this team, as we expect. Pretty good for Detroit after years of, I can't even say mediocrity. It's been less than, but pretty good start so far.
Yeah, I think that in the East, yeah, Detroit's got off to a good start. I think I've been slightly disappointed with how Buffalo has played because I thought Buffalo was a very hot, sexy pick of making the playoffs, and it could still happen, but they've gotten off to a slow start. A team I'm impressed with who doesn't have a great record is I'm impressed with Tampa Bay. They've had some injuries. Big, it was a big hit learning that their goaltender was going to be out for a while, and they're staying in the thick of it. If they can stay in the thick of it until their goaltender gets back, I think that you have to say that they're probably going to end up with a top three finish in that division. um a team I'm a little concerned about now too, and going to goaltending, Toronto is really concerning me, man. Toronto has not played well this year. It's their goaltending,
Right.
and I, I think that we have to talk about Toronto when we talk about bad, just what their front office does. I mean, they let go of Boy Wonder. He's in Pittsburgh now. I think the biggest issue with Toronto actually is probably they made some questionable signings in the offseason. Like, why are you signing Ryan Reeves? I mean, what are we doing here? Like,
Right.
and I heard Maple Leaf fans like, oh yeah, he's gonna protect Austin Matthews from Brad Marchand. And I'm like, oh, I'm really think that Brad Marchand is shaking his boots of Ryan Reeves.
Then protect
Uh,
Timothy Liljegren. Let's
yeah.
say that much.
Um. Um. I, I don't understand how Sheldon. Speaking of a coach who has kept his job, why does Sheldon Keefe still have the job? What does Sheldon Keefe do? What does Sheldon Keefe do? Well, I mean, what does he do? He just is on the bench. What does he do? I don't know what he does. What does he do? Like,
So,
you want to know
so
what he's like? He's like, to me, Sheldon Keefe reminds me of a guy, of a beat cop. He just walks around the neighborhood and he does nothing. He's walking around the neighborhood in Toronto in a low crime area. He does nothing, and he's getting paid money for. And he in the offseason it's like, oh well, I don't have any job security. I don't, and they gave him an extra year on this. Still, like, are you
it did.
kidding me? Are you kidding me? You got rid of the general manager, but you kept Sheldon Keefe. Sheldon Keefe has proven to you that he can't get this team to another level. He
Right.
can't. Like, you blew a 3-1 lead. Bad start after bad start in that in the game 5, game 6, and game 7.
Right.
And last year, you knew from December that most likely you're going to be playing Toronto. You're going to be playing Tampa Bay in the first round of playoffs. Tampa comes into Toronto game 1 and kicks your ass, and Sheldon keeps like, oh well, we weren't prepared. Well, isn't it your job to prepare the team?
Right.
I mean, what are we doing here? Like, it's a travesty that Jay Woodcroft gets fired and Sheldon keeps his job. And not only that, Sheldon Keefe is like, I don't feel secure. Okay, Sheldon, here's an extra year on your contract.
I will say in regards to Sheldon Keefe, um, that is, I think, a full Maple Leaf sports and entertainment decision. We've been talking about ownership a little bit throughout this. Maple Leafs ownership went through the whole thing where they had to let go of Mike Babcock early. They fired him early into his deal, and they've made it a point where they don't want to have to pay out a coach again unless it's the worst of worst situation. They don't want to pay out a coach that they think is doing a fine enough job. Well, and with that extra year, Brendan Shanahan making that decision to try to get the players to listen to Sheldon Keefe. It's going to be interesting to
But
see
they
how the season
don't.
plays
It's,
out
it's,
more.
it's obviously that it's obvious that they don't. They're losing game ones and game sevens in these, and they don't look prepared to play. And how he convinced them, I can't do my job because I don't have any job stability. There have been plenty of coaches that have done their job without job stability. There have been plenty of coaches who are better than you, Sheldon Keefe, that have done their job on the last year of their contract. Come on. And the other thing I think that's bothersome to me about the Sheldon Keefe thing, they were talking about how bad of a player Max Domi is.
Mhm.
Max Domi saved Dallas this season last year. That deal that Dallas made with Chicago to get Max Domi to save their season, it's not Max Domi, it's the system.
Right.
The system there is not good. And
Yeah.
also, let's just talk about this. This has been going on for a while too with their goaltending. Why is it that these goaltenders look horrible when they're with Toronto, but when they go to other teams, they don't look horrible. Like
Well, to
the
be
whole
fair, Jack Campbell's gotten worse since he left Toronto, so that's an
oh,
exception.
he's the one. But the whole time when Frederick, one of my good friends here in Korea, he's Canadian. He's a Maple Leafs fan. He would always say, "Oh, Frederick Anderson's bad. Frederick Anderson's bad. Frederick Anderson's bad." It's like Frederick Anderson in Anaheim and Frederick Anderson in Carolina has been good. Maybe have you thought that maybe it's the issue of Toronto and what Toronto does with their system?
Right.
Same thing with Samsonov. Samsonov didn't look bad when he played with the Washington Capitals. Samsonov looks horrible now. Like,
Last season, when it comes to Samsonov, it's very interesting because last season Samsonov was good. He was extremely good for the Maple Leafs.
yeah,
He was making so many saves. I think like in terms of like goals saved above expected, and also I think high
yeah.
danger chances. I think Samsonov was one of the guys. I think I like this is what I can't necessarily just blame Toronto explicitly because we've seen Samsonov do good as a Maple Leaf already. I think this is just him not playing at that same level. Just something mentally with him just hasn't connected from last season over to this year. And Joseph Wall has been fine. Like when we talk about league average goaltending, Joseph Wall, as of now, he's put on good performances. But I would say like the stats are league average when it comes to Wall in particular. Like I think Toronto to me ultimately like goaltending certainly is an issue, but I would more so even point to the idea of just the depth. And you mentioned their general manager, who is funny enough, the Flames' former general manager, Brad Treliving. The depth signings that he made just haven't panned out for that team. It's funny because for so many years, like the core four of Toronto has obviously gotten the most flack, as they should, considering they're the four main guys on that team. Look at the scoring leaders for the Toronto Maple Leafs this season. The top five guys on that team, it's the core four, and if you consider Morgan Riley a part of the core to make it the core five, it's those five guys. All the depth signings that Brad Treliving ended up making, aside from Noah Gregor, have just not panned out. Tyler Bertuzzi's been a massive disappointment on the one-year deal that they signed him on. He hasn't necessarily been the best. Now, some people say it's because he hasn't looked the most healthy, so there's that as well. But I think ultimately, man, if you're Toronto, it's been a rough start. The fact that you are tied with the Detroit Red Wings right now, I think is something that you should be thankful for. And you mentioned the disappointment of the Buffalo Sabres at this point. I think if Buffalo was firing on all cylinders and if Tampa had any healthy goaltending, I think Toronto would be more farther down in the standings. And this is a case where you've got to be thankful if you're the Leafs and you need to find a way to push past this rough start and try to return to form and hope that Samsonov can get back. So if you're Toronto, that's what you need to do and weather the storm, especially with your European trip coming up and what you're going to have to do there and win a couple games overseas for yourself. So that's the
Yeah.
Atlantic Division we just went through. JB, any thoughts here on the Metropolitan? I mean, I
Oh,
think
I
it's
mean,
kind
I
of, at least
think
for
I
me, this
think
is kind of standard form. Aside from the Devils maybe being a little bit slow to start the season, the Rangers and the Hurricanes as two of the top teams, I'm not surprised by. The Devils, I think, could be better, but I think they're going to round about. I think the Devils will be fine at some point this season.
yeah. I think so. My biggest takeaway from the Atlantic Division. Well, no, it's is it the Metropolitan? What division is that again?
My bad,
I get
Metropolitan. My bad. I misspoke. The Metropolitan Division when it comes
yeah,
to the
yeah,
Rangers, the Hurricanes, and the Devils.
yeah, 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 yeah. The Metropolitan Division. The Rangers have started off as the Rangers have started off as gangbusters, man. I think that a lot has been made of like the start that the Golden Knights have gotten off to, and with the Canucks, because the Canucks are suppressing, but the Rangers have gotten off to a very 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 good start. They're playing very well. I mean, I still think Gerard Gallant got like the short end of the stick of them firing him after 2 years, but the Rangers have gotten off to a good start. Been a little surprised, even though their record's not bad. I've been a little surprised by Carolina. Carolina has kind of not looked like the well-oiled machine that they have the last few years. And like you said, I think the Devils will get it together good. Now, a team I'm looking at that I'm very intrigued by. I'm intrigued by this iteration of the Penguins. I think it's a very interesting team. Um, Anything that they do for the rest of the year won't surprise me. If they make the playoffs and they have a deep playoff run, that wouldn't surprise me because they still clearly have the talent there. Or if they miss the playoffs, it wouldn't surprise me either. But this iteration of the Penguins is very, very, very interesting to me, actually. They have been playing better of the last like week and a half, actually.
Right, right. The Penguins for me, and you mentioned Kyle Dubas earlier when you were
Yeah.
talking about the Maple Leafs. Him being the general manager now, making that big home run of an acquisition in the offseason to get Erik Karlsson. People have joked calling the Penguins an old folks home, to say the very least. I think ultimately the Pittsburgh Penguins are they're a veteran team. I think there's things to like about this team. I think this is a case where they need to find a way to. I think lineups are the critical thing there, and this is where Mike Sullivan. I think his bread and butter is finding a way to get lineups, combinations eventually going and see what works. I think the pieces are there. I think the potential is there for Pittsburgh. I think they're the definition of a team that we need to wait and see on ultimately to check what's going on. But I think Pittsburgh, it's a rough start. There's been some inconsistencies. I was actually at their season opener, right? And them losing to the Blackhawks was something I did not expect for myself, to say the very least. In that regard, but they're weird, man, because the Penguins when they've lost, they've let up a lot of goals, right? They let up goals to the Ottawa Senators in spades, and they also let up quite an amount of goals to the Ducks. But you look at it, they have a 4-0 win on their resume against the Avalanche. They have a 4-0 win on their resume against the Sabres. They have, again, the rough games against the likes of the Red Wings, Blues, and the Stars, but then they've actually shut out the Capitals, and then they beat the Flames. So it's very much a back and forth, where when the Penguins win, they're the dominant team that night. But when they lose, they're getting they're absolutely skulls caved in.
Yeah, they're getting beat pretty handily because I know Dallas went there.
And beat
I
them.
think the first four. I think the final score of that game was like 4-1 or 5-1. The Penguins scored the first goal in the game, and then after that, it was over with. Yeah, so
so it's all about consistency to me for Pittsburgh. Like if they could find that easy medium where, hey, we can not let up 4 goals a night, and we can also try to win without having to score 4 every time. I think that's going to be the key for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like I think the pieces are there. I like them a little bit more, I think, than what most people gave them credit for going into the season. I just think that it's still taking Mike Sullivan a little bit more time to figure out the lineups. I think if we're another 10 games or so in and they haven't figured this out, I think that's the cause for alarm to be like, ooh, it's not looking great here in Pittsburgh. So I think that's ultimately my thoughts about the Pittsburgh Penguins for them.
Yeah.
So, and the Devils, like we mentioned, a little bit of a slow start. Going to be interesting to see how they bounce back. But I think ultimately, I think with the Devils is just a similar case to where you have a team that played really good last season. I think way above what most expected of them. I don't think most expected them to be a top 3 team in the division last season. I think maybe that would have been, if we're going on of timelines, I think last season was supposed to happen this year in theory, but they came out so great last season. And again, the talent's there ultimately. Jack Hughes being injured, I think, is the biggest detriment to the Devils right now. They're going to have to find a way to weather the storm, but I think there's still plenty of talent there, right? You still have a former number 1 overall pick in Nico Hischier. Jesper Bratt has performed phenomenally. Timo Meier, you could stand to get even a little bit more out of him, but I think there's that chance there. The defensive core there is solid. I think this is just a rough stretch for New Jersey, but I think they're more than fine. I think they're going to be able to break out of this in relative short order, ultimately. When it comes to that, the New York Rangers, like we mentioned, are looking really good, 10-2-1, the best team in this division. I believe, let me just double check this, second in the Eastern Conference in terms of points at this current moment, behind only the Boston Bruins. They are tied with the Bruins as well for the least amount of goals allowed. And second best goal differential is the Rangers. Again, just behind the
Yeah,
Boston Bruins.
and the Bruins and the Bruins are good again this year. I think people expected for the Bruins to fall off. I mean, I think that just goes to show you that they have a very deep team,
Yep.
very deep minor league system too. I just think with the Bruins, it's just going to come down to basically what are they going to do in the playoffs? I mean,
Yep.
last year you you know you don't want a repeat to happen last year because it looks like they're going to end up with the best record in the East or the second best record in the East. So they're going to be going against a wild card team probably in the first round again. So
Yeah, and it's funny because they broke the records last year. JB, they actually started off this season, the first 10 games, even better than what they did last season. so
oh
this
yeah,
team is just
yeah,
so good. Like
yeah,
it's a telltale sign that the Boston Bruins, like you said, I think the number one thing to me when it comes to Boston is the identity. Like the Bruins have an identity. They have a way they play. They stick to the way they play, and the skill players they have are really freaking good. And the guys that they have that are on that next tier of skill, that are a little bit of both, man, they just know how to work you. Charlie
oh yeah.
McAvoy, David Pastrnak, and Brad Marchand have been great, and all the guys around them. I've produced one of two ways: either they'll also score against you, or they will just beat the bejesus out of you on a nightly basis and just get you with hit after hit after hit. And every once in a while, get away with something, Marchand. But
Mhm.
that's ultimately how it is. So it's certainly a very interesting landscape here early on in the season, JB. It's going to be more of a telltale sign, I think, as we get closer to the midway point of this year. Midway point to trade deadline, I think, is when we'll really see who the true contenders are, obviously, and who the pretenders are.
That's hard, yeah.
If we have to end this off right now, I would say, well, you kind of mentioned it. We're about however many games in. Let's go to just division winners. If you have to say right now your final division winners for the four divisions at this point of the season going forward, who would you pick to win each division? We'll go one
Uh,
by one. So right now
okay,
let's start with the Atlantic. Do you think anyone supersedes the Bruins, or is this Boston's division yet again this year?
I think it's Boston's division. I think they've gotten off to such a good start. I mean, they would really have to just like have a lull for a while for another one of these teams to catch up to them. I think Boston's going to win the division again.
Yeah. Metropolitan, right now it is the Rangers who are in first. Is that theirs, or do you think someone is going to have a nice surge here?
I think that it's tough because I would say that I would say probably in of the divisions, I would say I'm not sure about the Central and
Hmm.
I'm not sure about the Central and the Metropolitan are the
Right.
two I'm not very sure about. Um, I would say the Rangers are probably my slight favorite to win. I would not be surprised if Carolina doesn't get half because I think Carolina has too much talent on that team, and they've been dealing with some injuries too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and even the end of last season, early this season, both the Carolina Panthers and the Carolina Panthers, excuse me, I'm thinking football there. The Carolina Hurricanes and the Florida Panthers, two teams that are both second in their respective divisions, have dealt with injuries, and they're still looking pretty good, and they can only get better. So I'm with you. I definitely don't blame it. I think the Rangers are great. I would give a slight edge to the Hurricanes right now, but no disrespect whatsoever because the Rangers are looking pretty good at the moment. Like you mentioned, the Central Division is kind of up there. You have these stars, your stars, who are in first place right now with 19 points, and the Avs and Winnipeg Jets quickly follow them with 16 apiece. I think there's going to be a bit of a lull. Dallas has been great. It wouldn't surprise me if they win this. I would give them the slight edge right now, but Colorado is just always a threat
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
in this
yeah.
division.
I think that I wouldn't be surprised if that doesn't come down to like the last game of the season or with two games of the season left. I think that the division is going to be highly contested, and Colorado has a good record, but they're not playing very well. I mean, the Blues went into there last night and beat the mess out of them. They beat them 8-2, and they lost the other night against Seattle 4-3, and they gave up a goal with like 30 seconds left. So Colorado's not playing very well right now. But yeah, Dallas and Colorado, I think that's going to go down to like the last game of the season, or maybe two games left in the season. Is what I
Yeah.
think is going to happen. So.
Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me. And the Pacific Division, Vancouver's had a pretty good start, man. LA is still lurking, but at least to me, this is the Vegas Golden Knights division to lose. And right
Oh,
now, I
without
mean,
doubt.
it's only by a point, but right now, the Vegas Golden Knights would be the President's Trophy winners. And hey, the defending Stanley Cup champions, phenomenal to start the season.
Oh yeah, they have been. No cup hangover with them. Yeah, I think they're going to win the division. I look for Vancouver to come back down to reality a little more because they're playing at an unsustainable rate. A lot of these teams are. I mean, I don't think the Golden Knights are going to end up with 140 points, and I don't think the Rangers are going to end up with 136, and the Bruins aren't either. These teams are going to come back down to reality a bit, but yeah, I think the Golden Knights are going to win this division. And
Indeed.
I think they'll win the division pretty handily too.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I think Vancouver, they've been good. I think they're still going to be fine, but I think there's going to be some cases here. I think a rough little patch here, like a 500 patch level of play, is coming for the Canucks, and we'll see how they can weather that storm ultimately. But this very much is the Las Vegas Golden Knights division here, and like you mentioned, no cup hangover whatsoever. This team's looking good. And how good are they going to be? Them and the Bruins. Is that finally going to happen? Or are we going to get another matchup? We'll give our Stanley Cup final predictions when we do a concurrent episode here in the coming months, closer to the midway point of the season.
Yeah, we have to have a midway point or a pre All-Star break show. Yes,
absolutely, brother. We are going to for sure be doing that, and I think that just about wraps it up on this fun impromptu episode of some early season hockey talk between the two of us. My guy, JB, thank you so much, man. You're the one that hit me up about this. My schedule's been extremely wild, man, so I wasn't able to do anything before the start of the season, but glad that we got to talk a little bit of hockey here, and we'll definitely be having another episode or two as we get further along into the season. So some fun times, to say the very least, and always love talking hockey. It's the best sport in the world, man. I don't care what anyone says. It's the best in the world. So, JB, thank you so much for joining me. Let the people know where can they find you.
Oh yeah, you can find me on Facebook under Jamie Bailey, and you can also find me on Instagram, Jamie B Foodie on Instagram. It's my handle. So no Twitter.
No Twitter. You're too pure for Twitter, JB. Take it from someone who's on that app. You don't want to go on there. You're perfect the way you are without Twitter now, brother.
I like typing in the people and their Twitter, and I like reading the tweets or whatever. I like the little war between Shams and Woj that happens, the little beef that those two have. So that's hilarious to me. So yeah.
Indubitably. Myself, the Iceman, at Jurg K40 for myself, where I do a number of podcasts with a number of friends like JB, and we love talking sports, man. That's the number one thing, and that's what we're here for, to offer a little bit of a reprieve. So, ladies and gentlemen, go back to watching football. If you did end up watching any of this, we very much do appreciate that. Let's enjoy the rest of our Sunday. JB, hats off. Thank you very much. From myself personally to everyone, enjoy Sunday. Enjoy the remainder of this weekend, and let's have a good rest of the week and rest of the season. Take care, everybody.